Okay, we're still continuing our investigation of that area of theological inquiry that is called ecclesiology. Ecclesiology is that area of theology that looks into the nature and the life of the church. That is the community of Jesus that was formed through his ministry and carried on by his apostles. This week we're going to look at that aspect of ecclesiology, which has to do with the apostolic ministry within the church. The apostles play a very important role, not only in the founding of the church, but in its continuing life. And so we're going to look at certain aspects of that ministry of the church, and this is something that is it's certainly characteristic of Catholicism and of the Catholic Church. So what we're looking at is the apostolic ministry as we understand it within the Catholic tradition as it's developed throughout the centuries. So in Catholicism, everything as far as the operation of the ministry of the church hangs upon something that is called apostolic succession. Have you heard of that term? And so, very simply put, is that Jesus chose apostles that would then form the foundation of the new Israel. That's why he chose 12. 12 is a symbolic number that means the people of God. So Jesus was very intentional about this. And he expected those 12 along with other apostles, because there is the college of the 12 that is unique and very symbolic. It has what we call an eschatological meaning to it, and we'll get into eschatology in a couple of weeks. So I'll explain more of that at that time. But also there were other individuals that were also called apostles. Not only is this recorded in the pages of the New Testament itself, but also in later church tradition and history. Interestingly enough, in the New Testament itself, a woman is called an apostle. So even though in the tradition of the church, that has been lost to us. And so Catholics tend to think of apostles as only being exclusively male. This is not the case. And another striking bit of evidence is that Mary of Magdala, you know her, prominent woman in the gospel narrative, she is given the title by the church, the apostle to the apostles, because she's the one that Jesus sent to tell his brothers, the male apostles, about his resurrection. So she is sent by him. That's what an apostle is. An apostle is one who's sent as an ambassador to convey a message on behalf of Jesus. She certainly was that, and she was the first person that proclaimed the gospel of the resurrection. And if there's no resurrection, there's no gospel. It essentially comes down to that. So she's the first one that proclaimed the gospel that would become the proclamation of the church throughout the ages. Now, the apostles, the original apostles that we read about in the New Testament, died. So, how do we experience the apostolic ministry? Is it just something that is restricted to the first generation, and then from then on there are no more apostles left in the church? Or was the apostolic ministry one that would continue on through the centuries? In Catholicism, we affirm that it has continued on through the centuries, that the apostles themselves appointed their successors, people that would follow in their place to oversee the church. And the apostolic ministry of the church continues on in what is now we come to know as bishops. Bishops or overseers. But bishops are the modern day apostles. So they have what is called apostolic authority. This is different than just saying that everybody has apostolic succession, because we do in a sense through our baptism. We're the continuing community. But there's a leadership within the community. How is that leadership passed on from one generation to the next? That takes time to develop, but it really took its form very early on by really the second and third generation. We already have, because the apostles are disappearing. And so we know that there were those who succeeded those apostles. For example, we have the first generation, which is the most prominent of the first generation was a man called Peter. Well, Peter, according to church tradition, was accompanied by a young man of the next generation. His name was Mark. The gospel that bears his name, that's who we're talking about. Then when Peter was gone, Mark carried on the ministry of Peter, and then before Mark passed away, when he got of a great advanced age, he would then appoint someone else to follow him. This was happening simultaneously with many people. For example, Paul is called an apostle. He claims to be an apostle, one sent by Jesus. He was not one of the 12. He was not a part of the 12. In fact, Paul never even met Jesus before the crucifixion. Now, Paul has a dramatic conversion in which the resurrected Christ appears to him. So that he shares with the other apostles. Also, there is our Lord's brother, who is called James. He wasn't one of the 12. He didn't even believe in his brother Jesus during the ministry. I'm not getting into the details of how he was related to Jesus. I do not believe that James was a son of Mary. I think he was, there are a couple different theories put forth, but I think the one that's most plausible to me is actually the most ancient. The most ancient theory is that Joseph had a prior marriage, that he was an older man, was a widower perhaps, and he had children from that prior marriage. Those brothers and sisters of Jesus were not inclined to believe in him, which older siblings tend to treat their younger siblings that way. But James also, even though he was not a part of the ministry of his brother Jesus, and even though he was not there at the Last Supper, we are told explicitly that Jesus, the resurrected Christ, appeared to his brother. Then he had no choice but to believe. So he becomes one of the apostles, but not one of the 12. So all the 12 are apostles, but not all apostles are membership of the 12. Does that make sense? So, and we also find evidence that there were men and women that were also apostles. The most prominent one that's named in the New Testament is a woman by the name of Junia. And she's explicitly called an apostle. And she was an apostle from the earliest time. She probably knew Jesus. Okay, so we're going to get to the worksheet now, and we're going to talk about how this role or ministry of leadership in the church developed. So it begins in Roman numeral 1, apostolic succession. A, Jesus calls all people unto himself to become his followers. That's all of us. Those responding to the invitation of Christ and become followers are called disciples. Disciples. So a disciple is different from an apostle. An apostle is an ambassador that is sent forth to proclaim the message, but a disciple is a student who submits himself to the teaching of a master. That's what a disciple is. And there were many rabbis and many holy men that had disciples. Even John the Baptist had gathered disciples around him, and two of the 12 that would eventually become apostles of Jesus were originally, before they met Jesus, disciples of John the Baptist. Does anyone know who those two guys were? John, the beloved disciple, that tradition tells us gave us the fourth gospel, and Andrew. In fact, Andrew's considered the very first disciple of Jesus, but he was originally a disciple of John the Baptist. And Andrew had a brother whose name was Simon, who is Peter, given the nickname Peter. So that's the significance of Andrew. If Andrew didn't do anything else, the fact that he introduced Simon to Jesus changed everything. Because Simon becomes very prominent, or as Peter, among the 12 and in the early church. So number one, in the ancient world, the disciple was one who attached oneself to a spiritual teacher. Very common. In fact, I think it was even true of the Greek philosophers, and Mother Esther Diane can point this out to us, but I believe that Plato was considered a disciple of Socrates. So even among the Greek philosophers, they had their students or followers or disciples. So a spiritual teacher. A disciple was one who sat at the feet of a revered teacher or philosopher in order to receive the wisdom necessary for living the good life. For living the good life. So in a sense, we are all disciples. We're still learning, aren't we? In ancient Greece, many of the great philosophers had disciples. Plato was one of the disciples of Socrates. S-O-C-R-A-T-E-S. B, in ancient India, the Buddha, by the way, that's a title and not his personal name. What is his personal name, Mother Esther Diane? Okay, that was his real name. The Buddha is a title which means one who is awake, enlightened one, or the awakened one. Because according to Buddhism, we're all walking around asleep. And then we have a moment and we're awakened. And I think that's very compatible with our Christian understanding. We walk around and we may even go to church, but we're totally dead to what's going on. And all of a sudden, it's like you wake up, you have an awakening. And all of a sudden, it starts to all make sense to you and you want to be at church all the time. Is that what happened to you, Steve?
Sure.
Yeah. All of a sudden, you became enlightened like the Buddha. Okay, so in ancient India, the Buddha had many disciples. Gurus were spiritual teachers, and devotees were those who sought the spiritual wisdom of the guru, devoting themselves to the teaching of the guru. So you can see that this practice of spiritual teachers and disciples is very ancient, and also it's in many cultures in the ancient world. So in a sense, guru we associate with Hinduism, but in a sense, Jesus was a guru. Number C, in Israel at the time of Jesus, many revered rabbis. And rabbis were teachers of the Torah, attracted disciples. So when Jesus comes on the scene and starts attracting disciples, this would not have been an unusual situation. It was done across the ancient world, even in the world of Judaism. Rabbis would attract disciples. Jesus did much the same. Number 2, disciples are students. So tonight you're being a disciple. The disciple is the one who receives the instruction. The disciple's role is to learn by listening attentively. So don't let your mind wander. Listen attentively to the spiritual teacher and practicing the spiritual teachings. You're not only listening, but you're putting it into practice. Now, this all seems, why is this even worth saying? Of course, this is what this means, but I'm laying the foundation for you. So, a disciple is one who submits to the teaching authority of the spiritual teacher. And the way it was done in the ancient world is, you could not just become a disciple of someone just because you wanted to. You had to go and, ask for an audience before the rabbi and say, I'd like to be your disciple. And then the rabbi decides whether he's going to accept you or not. And so in the case of Jesus, he actually approached people and said, come, be my disciple. So he was very selective at doing this. And in the ancient world, it was understood when you became a disciple, it wasn't that you were just going to attend a Friday evening class for an hour and a half every week. That wouldn't have cut it. You lived with the rabbi. You accompanied him. You were with him every day. And he was pouring all of his wisdom into you at all times. And it was understood that this was almost like a contractual relationship. You can be my disciple, but it means you also have to obey me. So a disciple is one who submitted, which means to be in obedience to the teacher. Otherwise, the teacher's not going to bother with you. So it costs something to be a disciple. And it was understood that you were submitting yourself. And so tradition tells us that the disciples of Jesus were in that relationship with him for 3 years. So it was a 3-year discipleship program. And during that 3 years, not only did they call him rabbi and teacher, they also called him master, which implies that the teacher is your master and your appropriate response is obedience to your master. So you really submit yourself to that kind of teaching. Nowadays, if that happens, we call that a cult. But in the ancient world, that's the way it was done. There were no seminaries that people went off to, or universities. Okay. Now, where was I? Middle of A. Okay. A disciple is one who submits to the teaching authority of the spiritual teacher. The teacher is the master, the word that I used earlier. And a good disciple is one who obeys the instructions of the teacher. The word disciple comes from this practice. This kind of arrangement where you join yourself and you make a promise of obedience to the master, this tradition is still carried on in the monastic orders. That's essentially what is going on. And you come and you go through a trial period, you're a postulant, and then you take vows, and that sort of thing. So it does still live on in the structures of the church historically. Okay. Am I on B now? Oh, thank you. Jesus had numerous disciples, and the emerging church was essentially a community of disciples devoted. The word is devoted. A community of disciples devoted to Jesus, the teacher, and to the teachings of Jesus. Boy, this is a lot different than saying, oh, I'm a member of a church. Sometimes we in our culture, we think we're a member of a church like we're a member of the country club. No, it's a total life commitment. 3, and I have a quote here from the Great Commission at the end of Matthew's Gospel. This is Jesus, the resurrected Christ, speaking. Go and make disciples of all peoples, baptizing them, teaching them to observe all that I have instructed you. And he literally says, baptizing them into the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I mentioned into, that's the Greek preposition there, because we're used to saying baptize them in the name, like you're just pronouncing a formula over somebody, and you are in a sense, but that's not all it is. You're baptizing them into the name. In other words, they're becoming immersed into the family of God. You're like into the name. In other words, you now have a new family name, and it's a Trinitarian name. Okay? So you can see that he says in the Great Commission to make disciples of all peoples. In other words, there was not going to be certain people you couldn't make disciples of. This is the startling inclusivity of the gospel of Jesus. We listen to that and we go, oh yeah, of course, 2,000 years later. But when Jesus said that in the first century, that was unheard of. Make disciples of all peoples, of all. And in fact, in the Greek, it's the word ethnos, which is the word we get ethnic. So every ethnic group. So it's very inclusive. So through the rite of baptism, we become disciples of Jesus the teacher. That is what has happened to you. Okay. B. From among his disciples, Jesus prayerfully called to himself 12 men who were to become his apostles. This is the college of the 12. This is a unique group. These 12. The criteria of the 12 is that they had to be with Jesus from the beginning of his ministry. If it was 3 years, that 3-year period. They had to be witnesses of the resurrection. And if you didn't fit that criteria, then you couldn't be a member of the 12. When Judas died, because he killed himself, there were only 11. And the disciples were aware that they needed to fill in Judas's place. And they stated the criteria. It has to be someone who was with us from the beginning, following Jesus all along, like the other 12, and he witnessed the resurrection. And they only had 2 people who fulfilled that criteria. This happens in Acts chapter 1. One is a guy named Justus, and the other guy is called Matthias. So they actually had 2. And they couldn't have both because 13 was a bad number. It would ruin the symbolism. So they prayed and they cast lots. In other words, they threw dice. And the lots fell to Matthias. And so Matthias was from that point on numbered among the 12. Nowhere, even though some people will say this, nowhere in the New Testament documents does it tell us that Paul was a member of the 12. He was an apostle. There were other apostles like Barnabas, Junia, and Andronicus. And we can mention many names. These were not a part of the 12. The 12 were unique. Okay. No. Well, I shouldn't say that. He never became one of the 12. He could have been an apostle because others became apostles. But the 12 is a unique group of apostles. Like I said, the 12 were all apostles, but not all apostles were of the 12. So here are the 12 that are listed for us in the Gospels. Simon, son of John, who was called Peter. James, the son of Zebedee. He's the first one to be martyred, by the way, of the group of the 12. Herod Antipas. I think it was Herod Antipas, had him executed by the sword. He was beheaded in Jerusalem. Then there was his brother John, the brother of James. Then there was Andrew, and he was the brother of Peter. Then there was Philip of Bethsaida, which is a town in Galilee. Then there was Bartholomew, which Bartholomew it means son of Ptolemy. Do you see that there? That's what Bartholomew means. Bar is the Aramaic word for son. So he's often identified with Nathaniel. So tradition says that Nathaniel, who's mentioned in John's Gospel, and Bartholomew, who's only mentioned in the other 3, are one and the same person. Then there's Matthew, the son of Alphaeus. He's our patron saint here at St. Matthew's. And Matthew had a brother named James, the son of Alphaeus. You see that? So there are 3 sets of brothers among the 12. This was a tight group. Then there was Thomas called the twin, and we don't know why he was called the twin. He's just called the twin. Did he have a twin brother that we're not introduced to, and so he's called twin? Or some people suggest or wonder and speculate, maybe because he looked so much like Jesus that he was called the twin. We don't have any idea why he's called the twin. Then there's Judas Thaddeus. This is the famous Saint Jude, who is the patron saint of impossible situations. Judas Thaddeus, not to be confused with Judas Iscariot. By the way, the name Judas, there were names that were very common in the ancient world. John is really a Greek form or English form. In Aramaic, it would have been Jonah. John and Jonah is the same. James is also an English translation of the name Jacob. So Jacob and Jonah and the name Jesus, which is Joshua or Yeshua, and the name, who else did I have? Oh, and Judas. These four names, half the people of Israel were named that. I mean, it's like the name Bill was when we were young, right? Remember, half the class was named Bill, Bob, and John, and then that was like half the class. Steve, yeah, it was pretty close to being common, wasn't it? But not as common as Bill, Bob, and John, was it? But in the ancient world, and just like almost every other woman you meet in the New Testament is Mary. It's hard to keep them straight. Not the same person. Okay. Simon the Zealot, and of course, Judas Iscariot. Those were the 12. Jesus chose 12 deliberately as an eschatological sign of a new nation, a new people of God, a newly constituted Israel. It's echoing the 12 tribes of Israel. Even in this action, Jesus is claiming for himself messianic authority. The fact that he would even do that is in itself a claim. Number one, an apostle is one who is sent. We talk about what a disciple is, but an apostle is one who is sent. The best English word, I think, for it would be an ambassador. You would send an ambassador to represent the president or the United States government to another government. An apostle is one who is sent to speak and act on behalf of the one who sent him, so he's deputized. An apostle is one who has been given authority to teach and to lead their brothers and sisters who make up the community of the disciples. In one sense, an apostle is an authorized ambassador of Christ. So what did Jesus do? Number two, he sent the apostles to do the following. First of all, they were to proclaim the gospel. So they were preachers. Secondly, Jesus sent them to heal the sick in his name. So the healing ministry is something that needs to be carried on. Another thing that Jesus deputized his apostles to do was to deliver the oppressed by performing exorcisms. Jesus was an exorcist, and so were the early apostles. It was just a given, even though today we think that's weird stuff. D, to teach. E, to serve. F, to forgive sins and to facilitate reconciliation. G, to baptize. H, to preside at the Eucharist and the prayer liturgy of the church. Those are the things that Jesus sent the apostles to do. Now, the apostles themselves will delegate that to other ministers. Number three, in calling forth and anointing apostles, Jesus formed a permanent community of leadership within the church. A community of leadership. This community of leadership, that's the other blank, forms a college in order to provide pastoral care for the church. The church, which is the community of the disciples of Christ. Are you with me so far? Yes. You going to try something? Oh, you're going to try to do something? I don't want to mess up anything. We're good? Okay. All right. All right. Now, I'm totally, where am I? Oh, page 3. Thank you. Mother Esther died. The apostles thus formed, nonetheless, remain disciples and are still members of the community of disciples. Because one is an apostle doesn't mean that person has arrived and somehow can lord it over the rest of the community. They're still expected to be disciples. They're still sitting at the feet of Jesus. This is one of the reasons why when I was the presiding bishop of the ECC, that I was insisting upon the priests, you know, I know you got this big degree, you were in school forever, 8 to 10 years to become a priest. However, that's not the end of your education and formation. It must continue on. I was constantly aware that priests and others were still disciples and still needed to be learning for the rest of your life. That's just the way it is. So some of you are in this class to become deacons. Let's see. Okay. Just 3. You know, it's not like you're just going to have this 2-year St. Cyprian thing and studies are over. No, it'll be a part of your vocation to be continually studying. It's like a lifestyle, life commitment. And you know, it's not only that for people who are in ministry as deacons, it's for all of us. We have a responsibility. So it's always a never-ending obligation to be of discipleship, to continue to learn. But leaders, too, are a part of that. B, it is the responsibility of the apostles to maintain unity within the church by remaining in union with one another and with Christ. So one of the primary functions of the apostles are to be signs of unity and to preserve the unity of the church. And as you can see, the church is very fragile, or the unity of the church is very fragile. It can break up and split up so easily. This is why we have so many denominations nowadays. I mean, it's a scandal, really. It's so hard to bring people back together once those divisions happen. So the role of the apostle is primarily one of maintaining a union with the community together and union with one another among their peers, the apostolic college, and with Christ. This unity is maintained by actively fulfilling Christ's command to love and to serve one another, and that takes humility. Number 4, this apostolic ministry was to be permanent and was maintained as the original apostles appointed their successors. S-U-C-C-E-S-S-O-R-S. Successors. Thus, the apostolic ministry was passed on from generation to generation in what is called the apostolic succession. The apostolic succession. I wish I had a marker. I'd write it on the board. Got that? Okay. And then we have some references to the book of Acts. Number 5, apostolic succession is seen as being realized through a sacrament. It is realized through a sacrament called holy orders. Next week we're going to get into the sacraments, but this is one of them. It is through the sacramental action of the laying on of hands that the ordination occurs, and the apostolic ministry is then passed on. This is key, passed on to another of the next generation. It is the faith of Catholicism that the church of the present is organically connected to the original apostles, therefore to Christ, through this chain that stretches through time by means of the actual laying on of hands. It's quite amazing to me, this idea that the person who laid hands on me to become a bishop, there were 3 of them, actually 3 bishops. Behind them, hands were laid on, and it goes all the way back through history. It's very organic. It's like, and it's pretty stunning when you think about it. In a sense, the same thing has happened to you in confirmation. The bishop lays hands on you. So, even though the bishop is there, is an individual mortal person there, it's the church that's laying hands on you, and it's hands that are laid upon you in confirmation, and that goes all the way back to the 1st century. Isn't that amazing? When you think about it, it's very organic. Okay, I can't remember where I was. Oh, already. Okay. Those who exercise the apostolic ministry are called bishops. bishops. Literally, the word bishop, that's an English translation of the Greek word episkopos, where we get the word Episcopalian, episkopos. And it literally means overseer. Or a Latin translation of that, or a word that comes from Latin, is called supervisor. Visor, looking over. So the bishop's the one's kind of looking over, making sure everything's in order. That doesn't mean the bishop is a dictator. Okay, I completely lost myself. Oh, okay. Called bishop. The bishops possess full apostolic authority and responsibility. The role of the bishop flows from the relationship of Jesus to his original apostles to their successors. So it comes from Jesus through the original apostles down in every generation, in each generation of bishops. A, with priests, the first word, and deacons to help them. The bishops preside over the people of God. B, bishops are a sign of unity within their own diocese. A diocese is a local community, or what we call the local church. The word diocese, diokos, is where it's come from. It's a Greek word. It means household. So the church is made up of numerous households. Households are determined by a physical locality. St. Matthew's belongs to the ECC Diocese of California. We belong to a household that include other communities. Okay. Christ is fully present. This is important. Fully present in each local community when that community is united to its pastor, the bishop. The bishop is the vicar of Christ within his own faith community, that is, within his own diocese. When we say vicar, he's the representative of Christ, or he's acting in Christ's place. The bishop is an icon of Christ. St. Ignatius of Antioch, who lived in 110 AD, and we believe he knew the Apostle John personally, where the bishop is, there is the Catholic Church. This is the first time the word Catholic is used in history. It's from this man, Ignatius. And when he says Catholic, he means the universal Church of Christ, the people of God that Jesus had originally intended to form. E, as a sign of unity, the bishop plays a twofold representative role. Representative is the word. Within the church. The bishop represents the local church, which is the household, the diocese, to the universal church when he meets with the other bishops of the church. He's representing. So, for example, our bishop now is Bishop Armando. And so when Armando goes and meets with the other bishops, he's representing us when he does that. The local church to the universal church. But also, the bishop represents the local church, the diocese, to the universal, or the Catholic Church. The bishop also represents the universal Catholic Church to the local church. And you really get a feeling of that when we celebrate confirmation or ordination. Because when we do that, we have the bishop. Now, I happen to be a bishop, so I'm here. But when I'm dressed in all of that, there's a reason that's happening, is that it reminds the faithful gathered here at St. Matthew's that we're connected with the universal church. That symbol of the bishop's presence is what we can say we're Catholic. We're part of the Catholic Church because the bishop brings the Catholic Church to the local community. So there's a twofold representative role of the bishop. F, the bishop is the primary pastor-teacher within the local church. It's the bishop's obligation to make sure that everyone under his pastoral care has an opportunity to learn the faith. He's ultimately responsible for every catechism for every Bible study, for everything. This is why I teach at St. Matthew's, because I realize my responsibility is to make sure you have an opportunity to receive the teaching of the church. G, the fullness of the priesthood of Christ is embodied for the local church, which is the diocese, in the person of the bishop. So it's the bishop that gives faculties for the priest to function. If the priests don't have faculties, they can't function. So the fullness of the priesthood. Also, the fullness of the priesthood is that the bishop is the minister who can ordain. Priests cannot ordain. Deacons cannot ordain. Lay people do not ordain. You need to have a bishop to ordain. So that's why we say the fullness dwells within the bishop. The bishop is the ordinary minister of all the sacraments of the church. There are 7 sacraments. We're going to get into that later. But the bishop is the one who ordinarily is the minister of those 7 sacraments. However, the bishop can delegate that to other ministers. That's why you don't have to have a bishop in order to have the Eucharist, because priests are authorized by the bishop to celebrate Eucharist. For example, deacons can witness marriages and be a minister for baptisms. But that's delegated from the bishop. A priest can do those other things as well. Here's something interesting. In emergency situations, you can baptize. In an emergency situation, you can baptize. And that's kind of an automatic understood thing. So really, all of you have been authorized by your bishop to perform baptisms in emergency situations. Now, nowadays, that's rare, but in not too long ago, when people were dying, death was that could happen more easily. Then those are moments, maybe someone's dying and they had not been baptized, you're there. Or a baby's being born who hasn't been baptized, you can do that. So so you should always have a little holy water on you, so in case you might be called upon. And how do you baptize if you're in that situation? You take water, it doesn't even have to be holy water, you take water and then you pour it on the person or sprinkle on the person and say, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. First, they need to make a profession of faith. Do you believe in Jesus? That's probably good enough. Okay, I baptize you now. Okay.
When we were kids, our cousins used to baptize each other.
Well,
we're all baptized, of course, but we heard that somewhere, and I couldn't remember my cousin.
Yeah.
So we used to do that. We'd take water, we'd swing each other, and then we'd go baptize people to do the whole thing.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, you were doing it.
Everybody came over.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Playing church is okay with me. Yeah. But but interesting that the sacrament of baptism is something that all of you can celebrate in extreme situations. You never know. You just never know. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, but the bishop is the ordinary, and everyone else who does sacraments is doing so because they've been delegated that by the bishop. Okay. I. The bishop may delegate to other ministers the authority to celebrate some of the sacraments of the church. There are what we call presbyters. Let me spell that word for you because it's a blank for you. P-R-E-S-B-Y-T-E-R-S. Presbyters. Presbyters are what we normally call priests. Presbyters are the elders, sometimes referred to in the New Testament. There's a whole church called Presbyterians. You probably are wondering, okay, what is this? Why are some churches called Presbyterian churches? And why are some churches called Episcopal church, if that means bishop? And why are some churches called congregational churches? This came out of England. and it means how the church is to be governed. So the Episcopal Church, which is the Anglican Church, the Church of England, is ruled by bishops. Scotland didn't like bishops very much, so they killed them all. And so the Church of Scotland was ruled by presbyters or priests. And that's where they get the name Presbyterian. It comes from Scotland. And congregational is churches that are ruled by the laity. And the pilgrims who came to the New World and founded the Massachusetts Bay, they were Congregationalists. This is where American democracy comes from. And Baptists are Congregationalists. When I was a Baptist minister, the congregation, when I became a pastor, hired me, and the congregation could fire me because a Baptist church is ruled by the congregation. Now, some people think, hey, that's a really great idea, you know. But the bad thing about the downside is that if my personality wasn't strong enough, and I was a young Baptist pastor, so it wasn't as influential, the congregation could say, by the way, you're not preaching on the issue of racial justice. They could say that to me. And I could lose my job. So it prevents the Baptist preacher from being prophetic. You see?
I know I was involved in a congregational several years. I actually got licensed. They loved it. Like in the top of the song, and there was hierarchical, everything, you know,
Yeah.
it was kind of refreshing. But then it was talking to the church. And what I saw was the downfall of the ladies who happened. Because when nobody was leaving, and the people stood up on the authority was there, people were plenty. These were people that ran the records and everything. They had no influence, so that they wouldn't notice.
Yeah.
It wasn't set up that way. There was no spiritual divine influence to come through and say, wait a minute, we're going to become more so the church is going up and say, after that, people just now. So it was so interesting to see. I really didn't see that.
Yeah.
I see that for myself. How I'm doing that in all these different situations. You know, it's really sad.
Yeah, it's the downside of it. The upside is that you have democratic processes, and there's a good thing with that. What we have attempted to do in the ECC is to blend, by the way, there's only three forms of church governance. You either are ruled by bishops, Episcopal, or you're ruled by presbyters, priests, or you're ruled by the laity. So what we've done is combine all three, and we've divided up the powers between them. So for example, here at St. Matthew's, we have a parish council. I do not appoint the members of the lay council. In a Roman Catholic church, council members are appointed by the pastor. You can see where that will lead. You see, right? Not here at St. Matthew's. The parish council selects their own members. So it's congregational in that way. The laity do that. There is a whole sphere of life in the church that I have really, unless they ask me for advice, I can give advice, but I don't make the decisions. It's made by the parish council. One of those is the management of money and the management of assets of the church. So the parish council has jurisdiction. And in fact, when the parish council was deciding to buy the building we're in, there were 9 units, and they decided to buy. They asked my advice, and I said, I don't think we can do it. I don't think it's a good idea. They ignored me, and they did it anyway. And that's a good thing. They made a good decision. That's fine with me. That was the prerogative. However, the council has no say on the liturgical ministry of the church and the teaching of the church. You see? So we're not going to put up, do you really want to believe in the virgin birth of Jesus? Let's put it to a vote. Ain't going to happen. You see? So that is the prerogative of the pastor, you see? So it is a division of authority. So by doing that, we're trying to avoid the authoritarianism of the pastor. where everyone just serves at the pleasure of the pastor and the pastor makes all the decisions. That's authoritarianism. But at the same time, we don't dump that and have the laity make all the decisions, so therefore the pastor can no longer speak prophetically. You see the thing? Or teach what is the teaching of the church. But I remember when not my generation, as you know, I was raised Baptist, but the Baptist ministers that were the older generation from me, a lot of them lost their jobs because they came out in support of civil rights. They said, Martin Luther King is doing the right thing. See you later, through a vote. We don't like what Martin Luther King is doing. Goodbye to you. I mean, it actually happened. So you can see where the danger of congregationalism is that it can prevent the prophetic role of the pastor in speaking the truth because he's afraid to. Did you ever see the movie Chocolat?
Yes.
Isn't that a great, it's the best movie about Lent that I've ever seen. Well, you remember the young priest that was there, and who really ran the church was not the young priest, it was the mayor. And the young priest would write these homilies, but he was required by the mayor had to review them, and he would edit them and say, you're not saying that, you're not saying that, here's your homily. Yeah, so anyway. Because that young priest, I identified, he was so intimidated by that mayor. Okay, anyway, I'm getting off the subject here. I can't remember where I was. Oh yeah. Besides the three major orders of bishop, priest, and deacon, that's called major orders, the episcopacy, the presbyterate, and the diaconate. Those are the three orders. Oh, did I miss something? I jumped down. I was looking at the wrong eye. I was looking at L. The bishop may delegate to other ministers the authority to celebrate some of the sacraments of the church. Presbyters, that's priests, and deacons. The word is deacon. I'm sorry about that. This process of delegation in itself is a sacrament of the church called ordination or holy orders. Okay, now I'm at J, right? Are we all there? Only the bishop may celebrate the sacrament of holy orders. I think I mentioned that before. K, this threefold ministry of the church, bishop, priest, and deacon, is called the hierarchy. That's what it's called, the hierarchy. Which is hierarchia. The Greek would be or hierarchy, which means sacred ruler. That's what it means. L, this is what I was reading. I thought that was an I. Besides the three major orders of bishop, priest, and deacon, those are the three major orders, the episcopacy, the presbyterate, and the diaconate. There are the minor orders of ministers. Those minor orders are as follows: lector, porter, exorcist, acolyte, and subdeacon. What do those mean? A lector, you know of. We have those minor orders in the church. Who's a lector here? Yeah, Annie, and Avelia, and soon. I got to give your name to Catherine. Right? You're going to be a lector, right? Kristen? And Steve, you're going to be a lector? Okay, yeah, there you go. There you go. Oh, you're a lector. Yeah. So there you go. Then there is the porter. The porter is the doorkeeper. Now, in the ancient church, the reason you had a doorkeeper, it was like a speakeasy. The faith was being persecuted. You weren't going to let anybody in, right? So the porter was the guy that stood at the door, and you knock on the door, and he pulled the slat back, and he would let you into the church. So the porter is the one who is the keeper of the keys of the church. And it gradually, over time, evolved into what we call the usher. But the usher is really performing. The usher is greeting the people as they enter the church. You know, it's a ministry of hospitality. And so at our church, we pretty much limit the ushers to being the guys who collect the money. But it's more than that. It's really more than that. It's a minor order. Exorcist. So you don't have to be a priest to be an exorcist. It was a minor order. And however, an exorcist cannot do an exorcism unless he presents the case to the bishop, and the bishop gives permission. So you can be a layperson and do that. An acolyte. An acolyte is one who acolyte is the minister of light. Remember, people were in dark rooms, in catacombs, and someone had to hold the candle or the light when the whole sacred books were being read. They're called bearers of light. That ministry of acolyte still exists, and you see it in the servers. You're a server. And you see it most prominently when the server is carrying in the light or during the gospel procession, carrying in the light. That's kind of a holdover from ancient times. Now it's just nice ritual, but it actually served an important function. So the ministry of acolyte is what a server is doing. But a server not only does that, but you see that there's subdeacon. A subdeacon is kind of like a server, one who assists the priest and deacon at the altar, clearing the altar, preaching, is on the altar, that kind of thing. So some of these ministries, although these are the classic minor orders, we can see that the ministries still exist in the church, even though it may be hard to identify them. Okay? All right. Yes. Yeah, make a comment about bishops.
The comment I want to make is that in a lot of Protestant churches, they've taken over the word bishop. Their understanding of bishop is not the same as the understanding of bishop in the Catholic tradition. For example, Methodists have a presbyterial structure because John and Charles Wesley couldn't get a bishop over to the colonies, and they were growing, and so they felt they had to start ordaining others to be presbyters. So it's a presbyterial line within the Methodist tradition, but they have folks in charge that they call bishops, but their bishops are not in apostolic succession the way Catholic bishops are, because they broke the line and it's a presbyterial line. Some Pentecostal communities also have folks that are called bishops.
Yeah.
Who are overseers and leaders of their congregations, but they're also not in apostolic succession.
Yeah, they don't have that tradition of the laying on of hands that's documented throughout time. Yeah. So you might have seen some African-American preachers that are called bishops, like Bishop T.D. Jakes, who, by the way, is a good preacher. I like listening to him. But he's a bishop in the sense of the Methodists. And in fact, the African-Americans, they were the African-American Episcopal Church. And that's where they get bishops. But it's not the same as we understand it as Catholics. So, yeah. The Anglican and Episcopal Church do. And the Lutheran Church has a presbyteral succession, doesn't have apostolic succession, except for the Church of Sweden. In Sweden, they still have apostolic succession. So then, recently, a few years ago, the Lutheran Church in the United States, the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the United States, and the Episcopal Church in the United States decided to recognize each other's sacraments and communion, which means that an Episcopal priest can serve in a Lutheran church and a Lutheran pastor can serve in an Episcopal church. But in order to do that, the Lutheran clergy had to embrace apostolic succession, and so the ELCA didn't have bishops in the apostolic succession, so they had to be ordained by Episcopal bishops. Now they have it. So the ELCA, that's a type of Lutheran, and the Episcopal Church have apostolic succession. I'm told by the Moravians that they too have apostolic succession. That's a very small Protestant group, the Moravians. There is a Moravian church in Los Angeles, and there's one in Yorba Linda. So, but the other Protestants don't even care if they have apostolic succession. You know, we never even heard the term in the Baptist church. Like Calvary Chapel, no apostolic succession, and it doesn't bother them in the least because they got the Bible. This is how it works, you know. Okay, but good question, Tony. Who are the original apostles? The eyewitnesses of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we have several of them, the original. There was the 12. Then there was Matthias, who became one of the 12. There's Saul of Tarsus, who was not of the 12, but he witnessed the resurrected Christ. There is Mary Magdalene, the apostle to the apostles. There is Andronicus. There is Joanna or Junia. And I listed a couple of scripture verses there because, interesting enough, they're women. There's James, the brother of our Lord. I mentioned him. The women apostles. Jesus journeyed from one town and village to another, preaching and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. Accompanying him were the 12. We know that. And they're mentioned by name. And some women. Immediately there were some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward. Chuza, Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their resources. Now, just before the verses I quote there's the list of the 12. Jesus chose the 12. And immediately following that, in Luke's gospel, we have the mention of the women. So the 12 weren't the only ones. Then they returned from the tomb and announced all these things to the 11 and all the others. Who was announcing it? The women. And it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Mary, the mother of James. So, it is quite possible, theoretically speaking, Tony, that your wife could become an apostle. Right? Gender is not, we recognize that, and it's right there in the text, in the earliest part of the church. Other women, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and Salome. There were many women there looking on from a distance at the crucifixion who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So there you have it. Now, I have here our apostolic succession. To give you an idea, you want to get these two? Yeah, how about that? There you go. Oh, I better have one of those. Okay. Okay. Bishop Francis E. Krebs was ordained in 2014. He is now the presiding bishop of the ECC, the Ecumenical Catholic Communion. He was ordained with the laying on of hands by Bishop Peter Elder Hickman. That's me, in case you didn't know. I was ordained in 1996 a bishop through the Diocese of the Ecumenical and Old Catholic Communities. Then there was C. Daniel Gensig, who was ordained a bishop in 1995, the American Old Catholic Church of Colorado. Before him, Augustine Sicard, 1985, the Ecumenical Catholic Diocese of the Americas. Then there was Patrick Joseph Callahan in 1983, the Ecumenical Catholic Diocese of California. Patrick Joseph ordained Augustine Sicard. Augustine Sicard also came. He was one of the 3 bishops who ordained me. I'm looking at one of the lines of succession. So this kind of goes back. Francis Krebs, Peter Hickman, Daniel Gensig, Augustine Sicard, Patrick Joseph Callahan, Emilie Rodriguez Fairfield. In 1955, he became a bishop, and that's the bishop that ordained me a deacon in East LA in 1983. That was with the Mexican National Catholic Church. Alberto Rodriguez y Duran, 1930, with the Mexican National Catholic Church. Marcario Lopez Valdez, 1926, the Mexican National Catholic Church. Carmel Henry Cafora in 1916 was ordained. He was a part of the Old Roman Catholic Church. Prince de Landis Burgess et de Roche, Duc de Saint-Winoc, He was an Austrian prince. He was also a bishop. He was ordained in 1913. The Old Catholic Church in America. Then there was Arnold Harris Matthew, who was of the Old Catholic Church of Great Britain. He was ordained by Gerardus Gull in 1892, Old Catholic Archbishop of Utrecht. Then Casparus Johannes Rinkel, Old Catholic Bishop of Haarlem. Hermanus Maykamp, 1824, was the Old Catholic Bishop of Deventer. Johannes Bonn, 1854, Old Catholic Bishop Haarlem. By the way, Haarlem is not New York. It's the Netherlands. Then there was Willibroed van Aas in 1814, Old Catholic Archbishop of Utrecht. Gilbert Cornelius de Jong, 1805, Old Catholic Bishop of Deventer. Johannes Jacob van Rijn, 1797, the Old Catholic Archbishop of Utrecht. Adranus Johannes Brekman, 1778, Old Catholic Bishop of Haarlem. And then on, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that name. Old Catholic Bishop of Utrecht. Then you see that this is pretty much going back to the Dutch Church, the Dutch Catholic Church. And then, but keep going down, and then you get to Dominicus Marie Varlet. This guy is really important. He was ordained a Roman Catholic bishop, titular bishop of Babylon. And he was a missionary in the Louisiana Territory, and he built a church that you could go see in St. Louis, right near St. Louis. He was made a bishop for Babylon. Now, a titular bishop is one who is appointed a bishop for a diocese that the Muslims took over. So there's really nothing there, but they still keep the bishop going. So he was the bishop of Babylon, even though there no longer was a church there. Now, becoming a bishop is a great honor and promotion in the church. Varlet appreciated becoming a bishop, but he did not appreciate becoming a bishop of a church that did not exist. Does that make sense? So, in fact, they wanted to send him to Babylon to restart the church. So, he didn't succeed. So he's mad. So he returns by ship and lands in the Netherlands, which is a Protestant country. And there's a Roman Catholic minority in the Netherlands. And they had no bishop. And they asked him, we have all these kids ready for confirmation, will you do it? Now, he's mad at Rome. He's not supposed to do this because there's a dispute between Rome and the Dutch Catholics. Because the Dutch Catholics for 1,000 years had been electing their own bishop, and then the bishop would be ordained, the Archbishop of Utrecht. Well, there was a dispute. And I want to get into all the details, but basically it was this. Rome did not like who they elected. So Rome decided to send one of their own bishops to be the next bishop of Utrecht. The Dutch Catholics say, for 1,000 years we have elected our own bishops and you just had them ordained. What are you doing this for? There was an agreement here, and you're betraying the agreement. The Pope said at this time, I don't care what you think. I'm appointing your bishop now. You're not electing him anymore. Well, they sent the new bishop that the Pope had assigned to the Netherlands. And the Catholics of the Netherlands, the Roman Catholics of the Netherlands, didn't want this bishop. So they appealed to their king, who was a Protestant. Because the Netherlands is a Protestant country with a small Catholic minority in Utrecht. And so the king of the Netherlands says, we're not letting you in the country. So then, for the next 100 years or so, not quite 100, but a good generation, the Dutch Catholics are there. Who's going to do confirmations? And who's going to ordain the new Dutch priests for our church? We have no bishop. Varlet is heading back from Babylon in his failed mission there. And he's really ticked off. So he lands in the Netherlands and is staying there. He's going to go back to Rome. But while he's there, the Dutch Catholic says, will you please confirm these young people for us in the faith? He knows the situation, and he goes ahead and he confirms them against the wishes of the Pope. And then he leaves. Well then, for some reason, he goes back to the Netherlands, and they say to him, you know, you could ordain us a bishop. Barlet thought about that. He was French. I'll do it. And he does, creating an independent Catholic Church in the Netherlands. This happened in 1724. In 1870, they become the Old Catholic Church, along with some German communities, Austrian and Polish communities. So that's how the Old Catholics came into existence. That's where our succession. So what I've shown you here, you see where it goes all the way back to the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Reims, Antonio Cardinal Barberini. He was ordained in 1655 by the Pope. So if you skip down Barlet, you go all the way down, that's his succession. That means our apostolic succession goes through Rome all the way back to Peter. I don't remember. I'll get that information for you. But that's a good question. But that's why this list only goes back so far, because that was enough to validate us. So when I was ordained a bishop, I was given a book of records that traces my apostolic succession all the way back to Peter. Now, that is important for us because that legitimizes us, and it also means that the Roman Catholic Church, whether they agree with us or disagree with us, they have to admit we have valid sacraments because we have valid apostolic succession. That's why we can still call ourselves Catholic. That's, Now, it's against Roman Catholic canon law. Well, we don't follow Roman Catholic canon law. What does that mean? Get this, Tony, you're going to like this. It's like this. What does this mean? Because we have valid apostolic succession, whenever we celebrate Mass here, a Roman Catholic theologian will say, that is a valid Mass. That's a valid sacrament. That means Jesus really shows up. Jesus is present at the Eucharist celebrated here at St. Matthew's. Now, an uneducated Catholic won't know that, but an educated Catholic will know that. They'll know, yeah, that's real. That's the real thing. It's a valid sacrament. Jesus is truly present. However, it's against canon law, which means that Jesus is present, but he is illegally present. So, you see, according to canon law, what we're doing is illegal. But according to the theology of the Church, it's still valid. It's still a Catholic Eucharist. It's still a Catholic confirmation because we have apostolic succession.
When did canon law become? What was the origin of canon law?
It starts very early in the ancient Church. It really begins to take shape after Christianity becomes the legal religion of the Roman Empire. Then you have to govern, when you have all these people, and the church has to govern itself. So it began to have what was called canon law. And church councils would meet and they would create canon law. And then it just, you know how laws get, it just, every generation, it becomes very complex. And so it's not a matter of theology, it's a matter of canon law that a priest may not marry. That law could change. It doesn't change our faith. In fact, for the first 1,000 years, priests were allowed to be married. Not the priests that live in monasteries. They're monks. They make a vow of celibacy. But your average parish priest was allowed to be married for the first 1,000 years. Then it changed. parish priests who are not part of a religious order. They're called secular priests. Parish priests were forbidden to marry, but they could still have concubines and children. It was a legal thing. It meant that your children, because it's not a legal marriage, it's by concubinage, means that you can't will the church property to your children. That's what it was. It was purely economics. And priests had concubines, that is, they would have a woman, but it wasn't about chastity. It was about a legality, which meant they couldn't inherit church property. Now, so then, even up in the time of the Protestant Reformation, priests would have concubines. And what I learned when I went to the Philippines is that many Roman Catholic priests have concubines. In other words, they have a woman, they have children. She's a common law wife, but it's not a marriage that's legal within the church, so the children have no claim on the property of the church. Yeah, it does happen. I mean, it's now. I really, frankly, don't understand it because you noticed that we have several Roman Catholic priests that are members of our community. Have you noticed that? They're here. These are good priests. And they would love to be active in the Roman Catholic Church as Roman Catholic priests. A lot has been invested in them. But they fell in love and they got married and they didn't want to hide it. That's why they're here. So I admire their integrity, and they have a place at St. Matthew's. It's a really, to us it's an issue of sacramental justice. And
I want to make a quick comment about canon law. Constantine has a view about priesthood and Christianity a legal religion within the empire, and then by 370 or so, it becomes the only legal religion in the empire, and by about 393, if I can remember correctly, somewhere between 70 and 90% of the whole Roman Empire was Christian. And it's within that kind of context, now they've got this huge number of people that the administrative structure and the use of canon law becomes necessitated.
Yeah. And now canon law was revised as a result of Vatican II, and the revised code of canon law came out in the 1980s. And it's a brilliant work of legal jurisprudence. I mean, it's really phenomenal. There's a lot I admire about canon law. I don't want to be knocking canon law because you need to have some, rules and guidelines. And guess what? We wrote a constitution in the ECC, and we now have canon laws. I mean, you can't run an organization without rules and regulations. But canon law can never hold primacy over the gospel or over the work of the Holy Spirit. And that's the thing. I'm a married priest. I know that's against canon law. However, I have a clear conscience. Because I'm not betraying the gospel of Jesus. And that's the same attitude we take towards divorce and remarriage. It's a matter of canon law, And so if you're divorced and you remarry, in our church, we rewrote our own canon law that allows for that to happen. Not that we are promoting divorce, but rather we understand divorce. And someone should not be given the burden of never being allowed to marry again or denied the sacraments because of that. Also, when people talk about the permanence of marriage, you were lucky to live to be age 40. They didn't take into account that now we live so much longer. And it's hard to sustain a marriage for an entire lifetime. And I admire those who can do it. But marriage is very complicated. So I think the attitude is to be merciful. Because I know really great Christian people of faith, are just great people who are divorced and remarried. And then I know other people who've been faithful to their spouse for 50 years, And some of them are great believers, and they're great people too. But I also know some of those who the marriages are miserable. So why should a woman, I'm going to give you a classic example because it comes across in pastoral work. Why should a woman who is being beaten and abused by her husband, he's being unfaithful, this does happen, and then the husband divorces her to run off with somebody, and now she can never remarry, she has to be alone the rest of her life? Right. And so, the gospel is about second chances. And the basis for that is remember when Jesus was talking to the woman at the well? And he must, hey, if you only knew who it was you were talking to, he would have given you living water that you would never thirst again. He's offering her the Holy Spirit. And it turns out in the conversation, he says, go bring your husband. She says, I have no husband. He says, well, you've been speaking truthfully. Was she? I have no husband. No, he says, you've been speaking truthfully to me because the fact of the matter is, you've had 5 husbands, and the guy you're with now is not even your husband. That changed the whole conversation. He's still offering her, he's not saying, well, we got to get 5 annulments here before I can give you living water. It wasn't about legality. It was about a woman who was ready to receive a gift from Christ, and Christ just looks past all that stuff, just wants to bless her. That's the way we should be about the sacraments. We talk about the Eucharist as being the medicine that cures us of our illness being our propensity to do bad things. Well, if that's the medicine, and we're the ill, why am I going to say, I'm not going to give you the medicine that would cure you? Because you got to go back and straighten out your life. Jesus never said that. You're too sick to get any medicine. It doesn't make sense. It's like the Eucharist is not for the ones who are well, it's for the sick. Jesus didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners. The Eucharist is the gift of Jesus. He gives himself through the Eucharist for us sinners. So it's unthinkable to me that we would say, divorce or married? Nope. Are you lesbian? Nope, can't do that. All this kind of stuff. We want to prevent those who really need the Eucharist, and we're saying you can't have it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It seems to betray the very essence of what we all come to the Eucharistic table dependent upon the mercy of God. None of us deserve it. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, we're all human. And I'm very cognizant of that. I especially became intensely aware of that when I got married. Because when you get married, all of a sudden, you have someone there who's a witness to all your bad habits and all that. And so in our early marriage, when I was married to Mirella, we'd be driving to church on Sunday morning. And then we got into a big argument before church. And I'm thinking, I don't want to do this. I got to be holy right now. I got to give Mass. I got to inspire people. I don't need to be in an argument, or arguing all the way from home to church. It was like the worst thing. And then we're arguing as we're walking up the sidewalk into the church. I'm setting up and we're arguing. And then Mirella says this, loud as can be through the church. Yeah, and you think you're God. What? And then I walk in the sacristy, and the server had come early, and I go, his name was Quint, great guy. I go, oh no, he heard the whole thing. I go, Quint, did you hear anything? He says, no, I didn't hear anything, Father. Then, so for the next couple of years, we drove to church in separate cars, just in case. Because I can't have an argument with my wife and expect to be on to bless everybody at church. So, and the same for her. But then we got over that. That's a young marriage. You mature and you move on, and then Oh gosh. Anyway, that's the lesson for today. I think it's great. Don't you? We're the church where you can just be yourself.